All right. Good early afternoon for some, mid-morning, evening to others. It's good to see you all. My name is Jonathan Neerman. I am the Chief Philanthropy Officer for Hebrew at the Center. I am happy to be here as your facilitator and have the privilege of introducing a tremendous panel here to talk about 10 specific things you can do to support students living with dyslexia and other language learning-based disabilities. I have had kind of a bit of an inside look as to some of the work that has been transpiring. So I, as much as you, am incredibly interested to hear what this team has to say. But before we get started, I would like to introduce this incredible panel one by one so you have a sense of who will be sharing with you today and where they come from and why they're here. In no particular order, Dr. Scott Goldberg has served on the faculty of Yeshiva University's Azrieli Graduate School of Jewish Education for almost 2 decades and was the founding director of the school's partnership, what's actually the Yeshiva University School Partnership, and has consulted with countless Jewish day schools and yeshivot in the U.S. and around the world. He is a teacher and consultant in many areas, including school leadership, governance and finance, strategic planning, multilingual literacy development and assessment, and differentiated instruction. In his role at YUSP, Dr. Goldberg worked closely with schools to develop the quality of their faculty, support the heads of school, promote educational excellence, and protect their financial stability. He is also a sought-after leadership coach for school administrators, employing a unique approach to coaching school leadership teams and boards to ensure a positive and productive school culture and healthy working relationships. Brian Coonley is the Director of Professional Learning and Consultation at Gateways, Access to Jewish Education. In this role, he leads the organization's professional development and training work. Before joining the team at Gateways, Brian spent 5 years working at the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, where he led the state's significant disproportionality in special education initiative and guided the work of other equity and special education projects. He also provided training and support to teachers, students, school leaders, and families across the state. Prior to working for the state, Brian taught 4th grade, 7th grade world geography, and high school special ed. He holds a BS in inclusive elementary and special education and political science from Syracuse University, and an MED in special secondary education from Vanderbilt University. Brian is involved with the Boston Jewish community. He volunteers at CJP, serving on the board for JBBBS, Yom Sport, and is chair for ADL New England's Associate Board. Rebecca Ritter is the head of teaching and learning at the Shefa School, the largest Jewish day school serving students with diagnosed language-based learning disabilities. Rebecca has been working to support underserved students for the past 15 years, both as a classroom teacher and instructional leader in New York City low-income public and independent schools. Rebecca's areas of experience and interest include language-based learning disabilities, designing and facilitating professional development, mentoring and coaching, and school culture. Rebecca has conducted and presented research on teachers' experiences of professional growth and using video to improve teaching practice, and has served as a co-instructor in the school leadership program at Bank Street College, as well as New York State certification as a school building leader, SBL. She is a proud graduate of the New York City Jewish Day School system and is thrilled to be serving this community. She and her husband and 4 children live in New York City. Dr. Sarah Rubinson Levy has been involved in education since 2001, working, teaching, consulting, and writing in the areas of supplemental, day school, adult, and experiential education. She holds an undergraduate degree in business and sociology and holds a master's of Jewish education degree from Hebrew College, a doctorate in education from Northeastern University, and certificates in advanced Jewish studies, day school education, and Jewish educational leadership. Her areas of focus include progressive student-centered education, integration of artificial intelligence into education, and teacher professional development and support. She considers herself a scholar practitioner, drawing from research and data to create effective and joyful learning experiences. And finally, Mamie Kanfer Stewart is passionate about helping people thrive at work. She is the host of the Modern Manager podcast, author of Momentum, Creating Effective, Engaging, and Enjoyable Meetings, and founder of Meteor, a training firm focused on productive meetings. In addition, Mamie is an executive coach and trainer who works with entrepreneurs and managers to build the mindset, skills, and habits they need to successfully manage themselves and their teams so everyone can be their best selves and do their best work. In her role as a philanthropist, Mamie is chair of Lippman Kanfer Foundation for Living Torah, board president of Laurier Academy of Brooklyn, and has served on a number of boards, including Brooklyn Org, Bend the Arc, 18 Doors, and Moishe House. Mamie, her husband, and 2 daughters live in New York City. And with that, Mamie, I will pass the microphone to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's so lovely to see so many people here today. As you can tell, I'm here in my role as a funder, really to kick us off for a wonderful conversation with some fabulous experts. Pritzach Derech began because my mom passed away about almost 2 years ago, and she was a lifelong passionate educator and spent the vast majority of her career working with students who had language-based learning disabilities. And she got very interested in that towards the end of her life in how to work with English speakers and English writers to learn Hebrew. And she saw this because being a day school teacher and working with so many students, that this was a real challenge and a gap in the classroom. And as a parent of a daughter who is dyslexic, I got to see it firsthand myself and the struggles that my daughter had in learning Hebrew. And so to honor her legacy and to continue the work that she was doing to train teachers on bringing the best practices to learning to read and write Hebrew, we partnered with the incredible team at Hebrew at the Center. They were such a natural and ideal partner to pick up this work. And so Pritzach Derech was launched. It's an initiative to bring together a range of partners currently working primarily within silos and establish a framework for sharing, collaborating, and advancing the communal response to a very real challenge. We'll go to the next slide. So we've been doing this work now for a couple of years. I'm not going to go through the entire timeline, but it really began with an opportunity to bring together folks from all different spaces working in silos to really get a sense of an understanding of where are we right now as a field and what is happening already that we can build off of, where are there gaps in our understanding, and where is there opportunity to build something new and better and at scale. And so the team has been pulling us forward. And what we are going to hear now are some of the key findings and actions that have been the fruits of this collective labor. So I'm going to turn it over to the rest of the panelists to walk us through the rest of the slides and the content.
Great. Thank you, Mamie. So as Mamie just picked up on, my name is Sarah. I'm serving as the project director for this project. And as Mamie outlined, there really is a huge need for this in the field. You'll see that we've titled the session, The 10 Things That We Have Learned. And you noted maybe from the previous slide that this really is a work in progress. It is a process. And so as we are very excited to share with everyone some of our initial learnings and takeaways, we are also very transparent that there's still much to be learned. And so going back to this number one, there is a real need in the field. As Mamie talked about, one of the main goals of our work is to break down the silos, to bring people together. You know, Mamie talked about the catalyst and how this has impacted her life. As the project director, every time I am out in the field talking about this work, I hear from people about the impact that these challenges have on them. We see the data that there are many families who are not able to consider Jewish day school because of these challenges. We see the data that because of these challenges, some families who are involved in Jewish day school have a really difficult time, both for the students and for the teachers, the school as a whole. And there's almost never a time that I talk about this work that people don't talk about how it impacts them very personally. Well, it's them, their children, their students. And so we definitely know that there is a need in the field. And like Mamie talked about, we have acted as this convener, recognizing, so point number 2 is that shared expertise and thought is powerful. one of the most important things that we've done thus far in our year and a half of this project is bring people together. Jonathan read the bios of the 4 people that are here with you today. There are other people. I see Mark Wolf is here in the call. He's also on our planning team from Prisma. SD Gross, who is from Hebrew at the Center, is on our planning team. But beyond that, we also brought together about 30 experts in practice and in research and in a variety of different areas, both in the United States and in Hebrew, to serve on what we call our working group, and to really bring people together to share this expertise and thoughts. And we found that while there's a lot of really passionate people in this area, up until the start of this project, there wasn't a structured way for people to share expertise, for people to share knowledge, for people to together think about what questions there are. What do we know? What don't we know? What is working? What might we try? There's a lot of different regional pieces happening. I personally live in Denver, Colorado, and therefore I and my schools have not been involved in the regional pieces in a Boston, for example, or in New York. And so we were able to bring people together from LA, from Chicago, from Denver, from the East Coast, from Israel, to really start these conversations and to really start to think about, what do we know? What don't we know? What do we still need to figure out? And what might some of our learnings from this process be? So I'll turn it over to my next colleague.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Brian Coonley from Gateways, as mentioned earlier. So our third of 10 items is there's a lack of clarity of what defines success. When we look at the range of supports and approaches across the community to help students with language-based learning disabilities or other students struggling to learn Hebrew, we find a diverse set of programs and methods, each with its own goals. There's a wide range of definitions of success. Some programs simply aim to help students to code Hebrew to prepare for their bar bat mitzvah, while others focus on enabling students to participate actively in synagogue services. For some, success might mean reading and understanding Hebrew texts, while others define it as reading, writing, and speaking modern Hebrew. This lack of consistency in defining success makes it challenging to identify the most effective methods. As this project has evolved, we often find ourselves asking the question, how can the success of 2 programs be compared if they have different goals? So as we shape the project's program and the work and the supports for supporting these students in communities around the country, we're not only working to develop a system to support the students, but also to clearly define what success means and how we will measure it, which leads into number 4. Most current practices are based on experience, not data. Across our community, as mentioned earlier, we have varied goals, differing definitions of success being the one we just talked about, but often limited data collection around the programs that we see. Consequently, many programs in Jewish day schools supporting students in learning Hebrew were developed based on that creator's personal experience. When we're talking about these like targeted programs, they observed a method working for a specific group of students and then built a program around what they saw working, often without grounding it in key data. Moreover, without a clear definition of success, these programs are often continued simply because a staff member, a community leader, a teacher, a provider has experienced implementing it and sees success, whatever that might mean to them. As we roll out a new program in schools nationwide, our goal is to equip educators with best practices for teaching Hebrew and supporting students with language-based learning disabilities. Drawing from the work of the meta-analysis of research and other research being done, we'll implement targeted supports designed to drive meaningful change for students struggling to learn Hebrew. Additionally, we'll incorporate measurement tools to collect data and ensure these practices are effective, leading back to learning.
So I'm Rebecca Ritter. I'm from the Shefa School, and together with Dr. Scott Goldberg, we were tasked with heading up the research subcommittee of the Pritzat Derech initiative, which has meant that over the last 6 months, we've been engaged in some short-term research projects which we'll talk more about if you come to our session later this afternoon. And there were 3 strands that we looked at in terms of research. And I'm going to share some of the findings that came out of one of these 3 strands, which was a lit review. So Brian talked a little bit about sort of some of our meta takeaways from one of the other strands of the research, which was a case study, right? We sort of saw from a case study, and I see some of the participants on this call were participants in our case study, and also some participants I'm happy to see from our larger working group. The case study really showed us that many practices across the country are being implemented without necessarily clear assessment data to support them. And people are really relying on a lot of kind of anecdotal or curriculum-based assessments as opposed to kind of universal assessments that we can sort of systematize across the whole field. So I would say that in the case study, one of the kind of big takeaways was, okay, how do we take all of these different pockets of interesting and potentially promising things that are happening in different places? How do we find what the research is to kind of undergird and justify those practices too? And then how do we bridge that research with the practice? So item number 5 that was sort of our key takeaway really came out of our work in the literature review that we're still actively engaged with, which is that there are many different disciplines involved and overlapping and intersecting within this work. So some of you on this call may come from the world of second language learning. Some of you may come from the world of Hebrew specifically. Different subtypes of Hebrew, modern Hebrew, biblical Hebrew. Some of you may come from the world of language-based learning disabilities. That's the world I come from. Some of you may come from the world of the science of reading in English. And all of these different intersecting and overlapping fields are not really have not really yet been synthesized. In other words, when we're engaging with the lit review, we're looking at 4 distinct bodies of research that are really disparate. And even within each of those, there is some disagreement and not entire consistency. And so what we have found is that in order to really do a thorough lit review, we have to look at multiple bodies of research and draw out what some of those points of synthesis are. So I think that's on the next slide. You'll see that there's really not agreement in any one of these. You know, the science of reading in English is a huge field, and within itself, it has expertise that doesn't necessarily agree with other aspects of expertise. And now we're trying to extrapolate the science of reading from English into the Hebrew language, which has its own complexities and its own syntax. Then there's a whole body of research in Israel that's looking at Hebrew language speakers, native Hebrew language speakers who have dyslexia in Israel, looking at adults, looking at kids. Then what's the implications of that when you layer on Americans or English speakers who are learning Hebrew as a second language and have a language-based learning disability? And it's not entirely clear what we're prioritizing with that second language. Is it so that they can participate in Jewish life? Is it so that they can have a conversation in modern Hebrew? So that lack of agreement kind of within each one of these different fields that are very much alive in the research community. And every time we write something in the lit review, then we find another article that says, well, maybe that's not actually the consensus right now. And so trying to stay true to what's most current in the research has been a very exciting but also challenging task. And I think there's a reason why it hasn't been done before, because of how much complexity there is to it. And then finally, the last kind of takeaway we have through the lit review work is that we really need both to synthesize what we're seeing in the literature from all of these different bodies and kind of draw out some reasonable implications for practice. And then we need to translate that for practitioners. So what does it mean that there's, certain kind of takeaways, which we'll share later in our session? What does it mean if there's a particular takeaway about how students acquire phonological awareness skills in their second language? What does that actually mean for what our practitioners are doing with their students on a day-to-day basis in the classroom? And so that translation and bridging the research to practice has been a critical focus of ours. And I'll turn it over to Scott to talk about another strand of research.
Sure. Thank you, Rebecca. So as Rebecca mentioned, there's a lot of research that's been published in various areas of the science of reading, in research on language-based learning disabilities, research on Hebrew, especially from Israel, around adults and the like. But there hasn't been necessarily a lot of empirical data that could be utilized across the field for the day school population of second language readers within the Jewish day school population particularly. I have the pleasure of having worked with colleagues in the general science of reading field, particularly Ruth Kaminsky and Roland Good, who are the authors of the original DIBELS, for those who are aware of that assessment tool, the Dynamic Indicators of Basic Early Literacy Skills, DIBELS, which is now called Acadience. That measure is unique because it is agnostic to curriculum. And therefore, one can look at trends across schools, across classrooms, across students and the like, without getting connected to the particulars of a curriculum, but instead look at it's an outcome measure. What does the actual outcome of reading look like? So I had the opportunity already 20 plus years ago to start working with them on a Hebrew version of that for second language readers called Madik, Mivchan Dinami Shechalot Kriya. In this project of Pritza Derech, we were able to have a large data set of that outcome data for children in various day schools across various denominations. And start to look at growth trajectories of typical developing students and high-risk students, those who are struggling readers, and able to understand differences in those growth trajectories. Broadly speaking, we were able to find that in second grade, for example, and we'll speak more specifically, as Rebecca alluded to, and we have a session later focused entirely on research. But just as a taste of it, for example, in second grade, we know that typically developing readers from this research, we know that they develop about 3.3 times as many words in terms of reading than those who are high-risk readers, which is a significant difference. And that difference, which in the English-speaking world, in the English reading world, has been coined already in the early 80s by Keith Stanovich as the Matthew effect, right? The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. We already now see this empirically, not just extrapolate out from English, not just theorize from our own anecdotal information, but we can now see empirically that gap continues to grow, and in third grade continues to grow as well and beyond. So we now know from this project, with the focus of this effort, that we have empirical data to show such a gap, and even further, as Brian said earlier, substantiate, as Sarah and my colleagues and Rebecca said earlier, really substantiate the need for this project very much so. When we think further about those growth trajectories, it's not just a matter of how much more typically developing readers read than high-risk readers, but we need to answer the question of why, and that's where we are right now in the project. We go to number 9, in thinking about other variables that might impact that, whether that be the amount of time on in the curriculum itself, the teaching methodologies, the training of the teachers themselves, all aspects of our work in Pritza Derech to try to understand what impacts those trajectories, what impacts changes in those trajectories so that high-risk readers actually begin to close that gap, what impacts those changes. And with that information, as we continue to look at the empirical data, we'll be able to inform the training of teachers, of coaches, and others within schools so we can help those with language-based learning disabilities and others who struggle with reading.
Sorry, I had muted myself. So number 10 is there is still much work to be done. So as you can tell from my colleagues and myself, we have learned a lot, and yet we know that there is much to continue learning. I started out by talking about how this was a process. And one of the things that I have really appreciated about working with this team and our greater team is undergoing the process and understanding the process that is involved in getting new knowledge, synthesizing new knowledge, asking additional questions, considering the next steps. And so for us, we are planning to continue to engage in this process. And at the same time, we recognize that there is an urgent need for knowledge and guidance and a framework for the field. And so we are going to balance both of those. If you flash back to the slide at the very beginning that had all the timeline and the trajectory of this project, we, starting in 2025, are going to be beginning what we call a pilot, readiness pilot. And through that, what we're going to be doing is, in very select communities with only 1 or 2 schools, we're going to start piloting some of this learning in an action research type style, which means that while we are piloting, we in no way pretend that we know everything. And so as we start to pilot and start to make that shift from questions and learning and research to actual practice, we are going to continue to engage in that learning and to refine what we are doing, and with our eyes towards expanding. So in early 2025, working with only maybe 2 schools, then expanding it to more schools, and as one of my colleagues mentioned, rolling it out eventually to more communities and more schools across the country. Recognizing that, like we said, there is this urgent need, and that everybody is in different places with their current resources and their current needs. Part of this is also some different simultaneous tracks. So we're currently working on a training program for mentors. As part of our intervention, what we're envisioning is having mentors working with schools to help with this intervention. So Brian, who you met, and Esty Gross, who works with us at Hebrew at the Center, are currently putting together a training program for mentors to working with those schools. But we're also going to be putting together training programs for Hebrew teachers, reading specialists. Rebecca mentioned how there's so many different disciplines. Those of us who've ever worked in a school know that there's a lot of different people that are involved in this work, that it's not just the Hebrew teachers. And so we're going to be developing training programs for these different groupings of people. We're also, I know that Rebecca started by talking about the 3 strains of research that she and Scott have been involved in. We want to make that research and those learnings as accessible to people as we possibly can. So as we get drafts of this, we're synthesizing it and planning to put it out to the field in a way that is digestible and can be applied directly to practice, so that regardless of where you are in the United States or even in Israel, though our focus is on teaching Hebrew as a second language to students in North American Jewish day schools, you'll have something. So whether it's being officially part of this initiative, whether it's being impacted by one of the trainings that we're putting together, whether it's just being able to read this field guide that we're putting together and synthesizing, it will be out there. And then our hope is to continue to expand the reach of this initiative to more schools and to more communities. So number 10, as we mentioned, we've been doing this for 1.5 years, and we have a group of very talented, very thoughtful, very passionate people, and there is still much more work to be done. So that is our takeaway number 10.
Great. Thank you to our amazing panelists. We are going to open this up for questions. So if you have a question, you can either raise your hand or put it into the chat. And while we're waiting for some questions to pop up, I would love to ask the panel, anyone can answer this. What has been surprising that you've discovered thus far? Anything that was unexpected or surprising through this research phase?
I mean, I'm happy to kick us off. So I consider myself a scholar practitioner, and what I love to do is take the research that's out there related to a specific field, read everything that I can, and then to me, often it's just very clear. The research says X, therefore I should do Y. And so something that's been very surprising and admittedly incredibly frustrating to me is that it's not that simple in this case. I see Scott kind of smirking. I wonder if he agrees. So like, I thought that it was just that simple, that we just had this disconnect between the scholars and the practitioners. And all we needed to do was find the research, synthesize it, make it more accessible to practitioners, and problem solved. And as Rebecca pointed out, it's not that simple, that there's a lot of disagreement. And so even in each of these very specific areas, there is no agreement. I think, right, Rebecca used the specific example is the science of reading. I thought it was just as simple as clearly people just don't know the science of reading. You know, Hebrew teachers just haven't been trained. If we train the Hebrew teachers in science of reading, then problem solved. But as Rebecca pointed out, we don't even have agreement as to whether the science of reading directly applies to teaching Hebrew. And so for me, that's just been very surprising, as, you know, this specific area isn't my area of expertise. So as I've delved into this area, I have just been very surprised that to me, it doesn't work like the other areas that I've tackled.
Ariella has a question.
Hi, thank you for doing this very important work. I'm the director of Hebrew and Judaic at Ilan Monday School in LA. And one of the challenges we have, other than supporting the students, is dealing with the parents. It is very hard because they see the challenge in English, because if you're dyslexic, most likely it's going to be hard for you in both languages. Although sometimes it's at the beginning of the work, it's easier for Hebrew because it's blocked letters and there are less rules, so it's easier. But have you done anything in your research to look at parents' cooperation, and if there has been more cooperation or less in over time, and what helped to get the parents on board? Because sometimes they just say, my child he's having a hard time. I'd rather them concentrate on the English academics of reading, and we will just do the Judaic and spoken Hebrew, but not the reading and writing, because it's too hard for them. They're very frustrated. So my question is whether you've done anything or seen any progress with the parents, or there is something in your research on that aspect.
I mean, I could just say, so we haven't researched kind of parent attitudes and beliefs, and I think that's a really important piece, as you're saying, right? When there's a parent-school partnership and we're not aligned on what we want for the student or what we think is kind of in the student's best interest, it can be very challenging. And there's a lot of like feelings involved, and there can be hurt, and there can be resentment, and there can be misunderstanding, and frustration on both sides. I think part of what I've seen, at least in our work here at Shefa, and we're a specialized school for students with language-based learning disabilities, but I think from our work with other schools, what we've seen is that when the school leadership is able to be really clear on what their kind of priorities are with respect to Hebrew language and Hebrew literacy, it's much easier to kind of defend those decisions in conversations with parents and to get their buy-in. So I think sometimes we as school leaders have a wish to be able to kind of do everything for these students and to get them to be able to read Hebrew and speak Hebrew and understand and write. And we know that this population of students need more instructional time dedicated to any one piece of this whole language puzzle. And so if we're able to say, listen, this is what we're prioritizing for these students as a school, this is why, this is how it connects to our school mission, and this is how we're going to be able to deliver on that, it's much easier to get, I think, the parent partnership there. But that's a tall order, obviously, to start with.
Thank you.
If I can just add to what Rebecca was saying, I think that, and it goes back to, I think, what Brian was saying earlier, which is really clarifying what the goal is for parents, I think is really key. And sometimes that goal aligns with what the school is focused on curricularly, and sometimes it doesn't. And I think that it's really important to recognize there are multiple Hebrews at play in different institutions. And when you're talking about English and Hebrew, we already have a dual curriculum. And when you're adding in multiple Hebrews, it goes beyond that. And there may very well be reason to focus on a particular Hebrew, like you said, from a spoken perspective, and perhaps drop the text. But there are many parents who would choose the exact opposite and focus on traditional texts and drop the spoken Hebrew and the modern Hebrew. So clarifying that, it might not be across the board for any particular school. Deciding who gets a waiver for English or gets a waiver for Hebrew and where you start. There would certainly be an argument to be made for certain students to actually focus on Hebrew initially, given the way in which certain Hebrew can be learned in a more transparent way, where it is that accuracy in terms of certainly sound symbol correspondence in small units would be developed quicker than in English for some of the reasons that you noted, Ariella. However, as we know from the research, dyslexia in Hebrew tends to focus or tends to manifest more in the fluency aspect of it, so that as you balance the push and pull of English and Hebrew, there may be micro level inflection points to decide how much to push in one versus the other. Again, very much trying to align it with parent goals and school goals and what you're capable of doing, to the extent to which parents are aligned with you in those goals, not just agreeing with you in terms of how you might achieve them, but the actual goals themselves. I think the more successful students will be.
I would also add, Brian touched on that there wasn't a consensus of what success looks like. And what we found when Rebecca mentioned these 3 chains of research, one of the strains that we looked at was what is happening out there in the field, what interventions are happening. And what we found was that there's not that many people, a lot of schools and educators out there that are engaged in interventions aren't also coupling with that with a structured system of assessment. And so we're not able to see the correlation between the assessment or between the intervention and the assessment and the student growth. And therefore, it's even more challenging, I think, at least as a former school leader, to have those conversations with parents. When you're able to show them actual data, we talked a little bit about, I think Scott talked a little bit about the different growth trajectories, for example, of different students. When you're able to sit down with parents and show them actual growth trajectory and show them actual data, it's a different conversation than the anecdotal data. And so one of the pieces that we've uncovered as part of this work is the need to educate more of the field about the value of assessment and the existing assessments that are out there.
I have a question, and maybe I missed that. Hi, how are you first? My name is Omri. I'm the managing director of Hebrew and Israeli study from Hebrew Public Charters Network. Prior to that, I used to be a principal from K to 12 in a public school, not related to Hebrew or Jewish school. Part of one thing I want to talk about is a neurodiverse student on the spectrum that are usually accompanied with dyslexia at times. My question is if you in your research separate between the two and identify if it's a ASD maybe approach or you just focus on one habit, and did you follow on any case study research or to gather data like ABAB style to kind of do almost a baseline of what works within work?
In terms of the train, I'm going to talk about the training part that we're working on in terms of support and what's going to be put in place in schools. One of the things we're working on right now is that for putting a robust series of supports in place for students, so that it is not just in a school focusing just on what are the specific strategies for learning to read Hebrew, but are you building a robust system of support? Are you building multi-tiered systems of support in your school? Is the school thinking about what does change management look like in the school so that all teachers are all teachers, parents, families, school leaders are thinking about how do we support struggling students, and meeting students where they are is really an essential part of being able to support this population you're hitting on, because it could involve different targeted needs and supports and differentiation throughout that process. So in the work I'm doing on this, as we're training the coaches in the communities, is thinking about what is the robust series of supports that will need to be in place in a community. In terms of the research part, I can leave that to my colleagues.
Thank you.
Again, I would, the idea of looking at different disabilities certainly is an important, I think, consideration down the road. One of the challenges, of course, is you can even hear in the way in which Rebecca was introduced, the Shefa is a school for children with diagnosed language-based learning disabilities. There are a lot of children who are either misdiagnosed or not diagnosed. And therefore, the focus of our efforts, at least initially, and I think that frankly the field has largely looked at it this way. When I say the field of science of reading and reading broadly in English as outcomes, right? So at the end of the day, we know what the inputs are, we know what the throughputs are, we know what the outputs are. Those trajectories, largely, we understand what it takes to have someone learn to read. There are small pockets of differences amongst different types, different profiles of students, but broadly speaking, we know the underlying skills. And therefore, how they manifest within an individual may be slightly different, but overall, being able to appreciate that there are high-risk learners or high-risk readers because they have weaknesses in any one of the underlying basic early literacy skills would be, I think, more of a fruitful effort than looking at parsing every single individual diagnosis and trying to understand that. That's been our approach up until now. In the future, as there's more empirical research and availability of populations that we can look at, perhaps we can look more specifically at those diagnoses.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
While people are considering their questions, one piece that we didn't bring up over our 10 points and that it hasn't come up, and I'm just going to put him on, I'm not going to put him on the spot, I'm going to point him out. So Mark Wolf, who is on this, but not one of our featured panelists, an aspect of this process that we've undergone. So Mark Wolf, for those of you who don't know, he is the Chief of Program and Strategy for Prisma, the umbrella organization for Jewish day schools. So he's been heading up a subcommittee, a task force that is looking at readiness and change management. And so we are also really aware that when we apply our learnings that we've taken through this process to schools and school systems, that there is that aspect of change management. And so that hasn't come up thus far in our conversation, but I just wanted to share with everyone that that has been a takeaway and that we are working on that as well, that there is change management involved in any changes that are happening at the school, and that that is a piece of this process for us. Now I'll turn it back to questions.
Thank you, Sarah.
Can I just, if I can, Sarah, if I can make that even more concrete, like an area which oftentimes I've seen, and I think we've all in the group talked about, is time. When we think about change management, there are difficult decisions that need to be made about prioritization and time, and what that looks like in terms of what is not done if Hebrew reading is a priority, whether or not it's in a day school or a supplemental school. How much time is necessary to develop a successful skilled reader, right? Within the, again, English science of reading world, the typical amount of time would be a 120-minute block of literacy in early elementary school, not just in kindergarten or first grade, but early elementary school through at least third grade. So you're talking about, when we say that, and I'm surprised no one broke into a guffaw, not only laughter, but like a serious, like falling off your chair, like what Jewish day school has that kind of time? Yet we oftentimes look at children who are having difficulty learning to read as it's something that's within them, as opposed to something within the system that is a matter of time, the training of faculty, the curriculum itself, et cetera, et cetera. or the systems of support, as Brian was alluding to before. So those structures and the time require so much shift in mindset and then in actual change that we can't underestimate, and we shouldn't underestimate, the change management thinking and planning that needs to go into any work that's going forward.
Can I ask something? Are you going to, is one of your objective to develop some kind of, I don't know, like professional development for teachers? Because I'm thinking about my amazing teachers. They're not coming from the area of, I don't know, special education or something like this. And so, or even specifically instruction of reading with all the, you know, there's so many like theories. And so many of them went and learned teaching Hebrew as second language. And that is not like, there isn't any like, you know, substantial, specific professional development, some kind of, you know, something substantial to help with that. And I do find that we're trying to find all kinds of, you know, solutions, answers within our curriculum. You know, we have 4 levels, but in every level we have students with reading issues, and so that I think is greatly needed.
You're just an advertisement for this initiative. So thank you, Eliza. I mean, I think you saw all of us in the Pritzat Derech planning team nodding our heads vigorously as you were saying that, because I think what you're describing is the experience in many day schools across the country in terms of the background and the training and the expertise of the teaching faculty and really the orientation of it. So I'll let Brian talk a little bit about the professional training, but yes, that is what we're aiming to develop.
Yeah, I was going to say yes to that. Yeah, the goal is to be able to, one is to be able to develop that, to be able to have materials and have things. We've started about a year and a half ago. We had a lot of discussions about what does this look like 10 years from now, but hopefully even shorter than that. Like, what are the things that are going to help the community be able to train educators that come from differing backgrounds. But even now, at the stage we're at now, amongst our coaches, we have coaches from differing backgrounds. You have coaches that will, individuals that have more of that special education expertise and supporting kids with disabilities expertise. And then we'll have, we have educators who are more from that their background is in Hebrew and Hebrew language. So one of the things we are doing now is having that like cross training between the two of them so they can train and we can come up with, bring each other our knowledge base so that we all are getting that same core framework, and to then be able to build on that foundation. And we'll continue to do that as we go into communities. They'll be able to take that expertise that they've built, that foundation now both have, and we all have, to do similar kind of cross trainings in the communities too.
Not 10 years. That, like, no.
I just said a number. I shouldn't have said 10 years. I should, years in the future.
I'll just add, and also to address a couple of the questions that I've seen come through my chat. Yes, this is all in the future and it's step by step. And so I recognize that, like we said at the beginning, that we're balancing this aspect of process with the urgent need now. And so we are trying to do these multiple different prongs to try to get out as much information that would be helpful to people as soon as possible. And so like Brian said, he and Esty are developing trainings. We're aiming to be working with specific schools in 2025, and we're going to be putting out digestible, practical, applicable learnings from what we have now. So even if you can't send because we also recognize that all schools are in different places and everybody needs this information as urgently as possible. So what can you learn from a document? What are some pieces that we have learned while we work to develop this training? So I saw that there's a question that came through about, can we please send the information regarding the programs for training of mentors? Right now, it's very internal with our pilot program. So we don't have any training that is open to anybody at this point. But I, as the program director, the project director, often get emails saying, can you send me Pritzat Derech? Can you send me, and right now I don't have anything to send you. And I will also note, I was so appreciative of the gentleman who spoke from the charter schools. While we are working primarily or exclusively with Jewish day schools in North America, we recognize that this is information and knowledge that will be very helpful to charter schools. We've also had people reach out to us from graduate school programs that are looking to help their adults learn Talmud, supplemental schools. So we recognize the impact. We recognize that there's an urgent need across the spectrum. There was also a question about, has there been research on specific organizations or providers that have been successful in this area? We have tried to connect with Brian works with Gateways, for example. This is an area that they work intensely with. We've spoken with Hidden Sparks. We have a representative from Hidden Sparks on our working group. There are a lot of really wonderful individuals and organizations out there that are trying and working. I wouldn't say that anybody has the success, which is why it's been so important to bring people together. So yes, we have spoken to anybody who will speak to us, anybody who has been told, through word of mouth, have you talked to this person or this person or this person? We've spoken to all of them, not all of them. We've spoken to as many as we possibly can to try to figure out what we can learn, and we're trying to put it all together. We are also at Hebrew at the Center always very aware of the needs of Hebrew language teachers. And so we're in the process of putting together different certification programs or certificate programs and how we can best provide the professional development that teachers need. So I will pause there.
And I'm going to start moving us into a wrap up here. One of the things that I think is really compelling about the way that Pritzat Derech is oriented is that it's really looking at a whole system solution. That there are so many moving parts to educating a student, and that we cannot just do teacher training. We cannot just do school culture and the importance of this work for schools to take it very seriously and not let it be the 17th thing down on their priority list as the head of school. We need parents to be partners with the teachers and with their students. We need a shift in our communities to prioritize these readers and to make this an important part of what it means to be part of the Jewish community. So there's a whole system approach, which just means that things are probably going to take longer than we ultimately would love them to, and that hopefully the impact will be bigger than we can even imagine, which is the thing to me that is so exciting, is that by the time my dyslexic daughter has her own children, that this won't even be a conversation anymore. And maybe that's 20 years from now, but there will be a moment when this will be so ingrained into how communities and schools and teachers and families operate that, everyone will learn to read and hopefully write and speak Hebrew, because the school will be set up that way and the students will be supported to be successful. So to officially wrap us up, I'd love to open up to our panelists for any final thoughts or calls to action that you have for everyone here today.
I'm just going to share that I'm going to put contact information in the chat. I see a few of you reaching out to me individually. We will do our best to continue to publicize things about this initiative. And like I said, I'm going to put information in the chat that's going to link you to the initiative's website and give you direct access to me. So if you would like to be put on our mailing list or continue the conversation with me or the project in any way, happy to continue that. So I'm just going to put that in the chat and then give it back to my panelists.
I'll just speak on behalf of the group just to thank everyone. This is, as you can see, very much a group effort, and every time someone lends their expertise or their experience or their time, it makes the project stronger. So just thank you. And on behalf of the students who I know really want to learn Hebrew and really need and deserve better, thank you on behalf of them too.
Thank you, Rebecca. on behalf of everyone in attendance, I think I will thank this panel and others, as they noted, for all the incredible work happening to move this initiative forward. I think everyone has a personal experience with dyslexia or another language-based learning disability, somebody in their lives has been affected. This is sacred work. And I just want to thank all of you for joining us in this effort. And before we close, I'm going to just pass this to Rabbi Andrew Ergus, my colleague and CEO of Hebrew at the Center.
Thank you. I guess I'll get put on the spot as well. Aliza, I loved your question. 10 years ago, if you asked how many people have a graduate degree in teaching modern Hebrew, I could have told you their names. It would have been a handful, and not even a regular hand. It would have been a Mickey Mouse hand with, only 3 or 4 fingers. Our intention here is to put in place an approach that creates professional Hebrew reading specialists as a graduate certified person who can bring this kind of work to the field, whether they're embedded in a school, embedded in a community, a private practitioner, but that have brought all of this knowledge together in a holistic way and can intervene at those different levels to ensure that we're meeting more students. And the idea that we could have 100 or 200 of these people out working in the community in the next 5 to 10 years, that is not an impossible dream. Im tirtzu enzo agada. We can make that happen, and that's the direction that we're going. So a huge thanks to the Littman Kanfer Family Foundation, who challenged us to with this issue and asked us to rise to the occasion. A huge thanks to the Covenant Foundation that has stepped in to also assist. I cannot thank the extraordinary people on our planning team enough. Everybody has full-time jobs, and yet they are putting their minds and their hearts, their experience, and their insights together to create a true solution that will be transformative for between 20 and 30% of our students who are struggling with this, and send a message to the other 70 to 80% that you are part of a Jewish community that believes Jewish education and Hebrew language education should be available to all. So a huge thanks to everyone, to all of you who expressed interest by joining this call, and we look forward to sharing where we go as this unfolds.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everyone. Reminder, this will be available for you to view through December using your link. And in about 8 minutes, we hope you will join us for an incredibly exciting session on the state of the field of Hebrew education. So we will see you soon. Thank you again.